Hello, thank you so much for joining us. This is Shiza Hashmi live from Pakistan TV Digital. At the moment, the third round of talks between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban are going on in Istanbul, of course, moderated by Turkey and Qatar right now. We are going to be discussing this situation in detail and deliberate upon what the outcome may be. I have a remarkable panel of guests with me over here, joined live. I am having with me Mariam Elahi, the reporter for Pakistan TV Digital. Also with me, I have Aisha Mir, journalist for Pakistan TV Digital. I'm also joined by Anas Malik, the bureau chief and international correspondent from Asia One. I think I'm going to start with Mariam over here. Thank you so much for joining us. Mariam, you are at the moment in Istanbul, right outside the Conrad hotels. Can you please have the situation on ground and what are the developments of the talks right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Shiza. If we're talking about the negotiations, since yesterday the negotiations have been happening, more or less if we say that constantly or continuously wouldn't be wrong because you get to be there and you get a very brief break in the middle of that, but that doesn't count, right? Because we're sitting with this Afghan side for the third time here, and the previous two talks, if we could talk about that, the first talk that eventually resulted in Pakistan and Afghan Taliban with the mutual understanding agreeing for a ceasefire, and then the second talk, which actually saw very limited progress. Was giving us very, if I can use that word, like cautious optimism, like what we were going to expect today from here and from since yesterday, what's going on. We have been listening and we have been knowing that the conversations between both parties have been, direct and indirect. But Pakistan comes to the negotiating table very, very clear that we are not going to compromise on one thing, that the cross-border terrorism that is happening in Pakistan needs to end. Now, this is something we need to understand that the other party, which is the Afghan Taliban, more or less, you cannot expect them to be completely taking on the CTP, right? So right now, there is no such, we can see like big breakthrough coming out of the negotiation room, but there is still room for that to happen since we're like constantly engaged by the negotiators, by the mediators, and they're like trying to convince the Afghan side of Pakistan's demands. Now, Pakistan has given, as early we have already broken the news that Pakistan had given the basically the can you hear me? Pakistan has given the demands and the irrefutable evidences as to what has been happening here and what needs to be discussed by the mediators with the Afghan Taliban or maybe later on directly as well. But that being said, we have been constantly being told that the Afghan side is actually waiting, or maybe you can say they are kind of running away from this one constant demand from Pakistan, which is that we want the assurances from the Afghan Taliban in Britain that they will be taking on the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan. Now, as I said, that more or less they're
Right,
like,
Mariam.
two sides of the same coin, or maybe not coming out on them so categorically clear. So, not as such a update as of now, since the negotiations are still going on. But as we speak, we need to understand that this is really high stakes environment going on. We are being led. The delegation of Pakistan is being led by the intelligence chief, and the delegation of Afghanistan is also being led by the intelligence chief. Now that is very high stakes delegations already, right? Our intelligence chief happens to be the national security advisor as well. So more appropriately, we
Thank
can
you, Mariam,
clearly
for
say
moving
that.
to this right now. It's true, there's a huge mistrust between both the parties at the moment, of course. Pakistan is being represented in these talks by, as Mariam mentioned, the civil and military leadership of Pakistan, the DGISI himself, Lieutenant General Asim Malik, along with the officials from Foreign Office and other military officials are present in Istanbul while the talks are going on at the moment. Anas, I want to move on to you and I want to ask what do you think the mechanism of the talks is right now? Because you have been working specifically between in Afghanistan, also exploring the relations of Afghanistan and Pakistan. What do you think is the mechanism of these talks? And if you think Afghan side is actually serious to maintain any kind of peace with Pakistan?
Well, I think last question first. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I think one, the fact that the Afghan side has also sent in a senior delegation, it shows their willingness to engage and resolve the issues at hand. That should not be discarded. Yes, there is an inherent issue at hand, and that is the issue of terrorism that continues to emanate from the Afghan soil. But at the same time, this time, they have sent in a senior delegation that is being led by the Afghan Taliban's intelligence chief, Abdul Haq Wasiq. Also has the deputy interior minister, who was previously in part of the talks as well. I was here in Istanbul, right outside this very hotel where I'm standing, on the 25th, 26th, up until the 30th, when the talks had a seeming breakdown as well. And then we saw that post statement being issued. Now, what's changed between these talks and the last talks? I think there is one thing that is quite significant. Last talks, Pakistan was quite well prepared. They went in and gave in their comprehensive proposal for a political solution. The Taliban were seemingly underprepared for that. They were not ready for it. And that is why they took 13 hours to study it, deliberate upon it, discuss it, and come up with their counter proposal to Pakistan's proposal. Now, amidst that, the first thing that the Taliban had did when they had, or rather, they had sought, just as the Pakistani side had submitted their proposal, was a secure direct line between Kabul and Kandahar. I think while the discussion this time has also been between Kabul, Kandahar, and Istanbul, the frequency of it has seemingly tamed down or tailed down. It simmered down, considerably simmered down. And that would not be wrong to say. So, yes, to answer the last part of your question, there seems to be some eagerness or willingness, at least on the part of Afghan Taliban, where they would want to proceed and they would want to have a neighborly relation with Pakistan. Number one. Number two, with regards to the format of the meeting, I'll slightly take you back in time and take you back at the talks that took place on the 18th of October in
Right.
Doha.
Anas,
Those
I'm really sorry to cut you over here, but your voice is breaking up. There's a connection issue. I believe we will be getting back to you. Please hold that thought. I will be moving on to Aisha Mir, journalist for Pakistan TV Digital over here. Aisha, we know that Pakistan's stance has been really and very clear in this matter that Afghan soil must not be used by TTP or any similar organization, anti-Pakistan organization, to create any sort of terror or chaos inside Pakistan. But a very important thing to notice over here is that these organizations are continuously being funded and they're continuously getting hands on modern weaponry. Where do you think this is coming from?
Absolutely, Shaza. One of the main concerns that Pakistan has over and over repeated is that Afghan soil cannot be used by terrorist organizations against Pakistan. And I think in terms of evidence, this has been documented by international media, and also the U.S. government acknowledges that when they did withdraw from Afghanistan in 2021, there were weapons worth $7.2 million that were left behind, and these are millions of weapons that are now unaccounted for, and now they've fallen into the hands of these Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which openly threatens Pakistan as well. And it's not just them, but these weapons have fallen into the hands of other terrorist organizations such as the ISKP, and even all the way up to Yemen. These weapons travel. So this was something that the Taliban government should have been careful of. And it's not as easy just to say that we don't really know, or we don't have control over BLA or TTP, because if there are weapons that are inside their soil that are being used by terrorist organizations against Pakistan, then that's a violation of the Doha Agreement as well. So that's something. It's reported by the BBC, it's reported by the Washington Post, and President Trump has also acknowledged it. So it's a very well-known fact.
Right, but Aisha, you mentioned a very interesting thing over here that other than TTP, other organizations are somehow also making use of these weapons and equipment. I would request you to please hold on to that thought because I want to get back to Anas Malik over here. Anas, you were discussing how you have some hope over there between for Pakistan and Afghanistan to end up in a peaceful solution during these talks. Can you please further that thought?
So, circling back to the first part of your question, thank you so much again. And circling back to the first part of your question, these talks that are being held in Istanbul are essentially along the lines of what happened in Doha. On the 18th of October, when the Doha talks happened, on the 17th or 18th of October, and when the Doha talks happened, so they were divided in three sessions. The first session was where individually both the mediators spoke to both the concerning parties. So that meant when Turkey was talking to Pakistan, Qatar was talking to Afghanistan. When Qatar was talking to Pakistan, Turkey was talking to Afghanistan. And they were trying to understand the concerns, trying to see the evidence, and trying to get a hold or get a sense of what the issues were. Then came in the cross mechanism where all of them were together in one big room. So these talks that began yesterday here in Istanbul were essentially along the same lines. Today we're expecting some sort of a proposal being tabled by the mediators to gauge and to get a sense whether the Taliban would be willing. Because the last time, on day three of the talks, and I remember that very clearly, when the Taliban brought in an absurd demand to make the US as a party to these negotiations, or as a guarantor to these negotiations. That is something that offended the negotiators as well, and the mediators particularly, and that gave them a sense that the Taliban were not sincere or serious in these negotiations. The sincerity was not just counted by this, but it was also counted for with the attack when the ISPR release came in, when there was continued infiltration of terrorists that was still ongoing during those talks. And in fact, yesterday as well, we saw a brief pause. The talks were not suspended, a brief pause, but the willingness, the eagerness to continue talking, to continue to emphasize on dialogue and diplomacy over conflict and violence. It is a testament of the fact on both sides, not just on Islamabad or on the part of Kabul as well, that they would want these tensions to simmer down, and the issues to be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy. Liza? Hello.
Mariam, furthering on your thoughts on what the talks are going to be, can you please deliberate on what the outcomes may be and how soon can we know about that? Since you're on ground, you have latest updates. Mariam, are you with us? Right. I believe Mariam Elahi is probably having a technical issue. We will soon be joined by Mariam again. Circling back to Aisha Mir over here. Aisha, you were mentioning how these equipment and weapons are being used not only by TTP, but other organizations across both sides of the border. A very interesting question arises. How are these equipment and weapons easily smuggled across the border?
It's actually not that hard these days, especially with our phones and the internet. It's actually very well documented that some of these weapons are even sold online, and like a lot of them are advertised through WhatsApp groups. And it's not that hard to get a hold of them. So, which is why that raises another question on the Afghan Taliban government, that why is it so easy for these weapons to travel if initially they had acquired these weapons for their own safety as well. And it's not just that, then it doesn't just become a problem for Pakistan, it's a problem for the whole region, because these weapons are traveling across borders and landing in the hands of other terrorist organizations all the way from Pakistan to Uzbekistan. So the whole region needs to start thinking about it, even other countries. And there's a great that's a great burden on not just the Afghan Taliban, but also other countries that have been involved in the wars there as well. And I think why it's important for Pakistan and why Pakistan keeps raising this issue again and again is because we've lost thousands of civilians and security personnel because of these terrorist attacks. So and if I point out in particular, we've lost 80,000 lives just in the last few years to these terrorist attacks, and just in the last year we've lost 1,600 civilian and soldiers. So it's a matter of grave concern, and like Mariam said, it's a high stakes situation, and it would only be in the interest of both countries the if this issue is resolved and if these talks end on a good note.
Right. I believe Mariam Elahi is back online with us. Mariam, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Shiva. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely. Mariam, I want you to please deliberate on what the expectations are for the outcome of these talks.
Well, Shweta, if you're talking about the expectations, as Anas, my colleague, has mentioned, uh, there is significantly like the situation as compared to the last talks we've had with the negotiations in the second round of negotiations. It's quite considerably better, but I would still suggest, and I would still say, as per whenever we've been speaking to the defense minister and whenever we've been speaking to Islamabad spokesperson, we do not get a very optimistic word from them. Now they say that they have to be optimistic, but then again they have to be guarding their optimism as well. But since Anas, the way he elaborated that Afghan side is being a little bit more serious this time, that shows. But we have to keep in mind and we have to keep in view the pattern of events that have happened. For example, yesterday when we saw that tweet coming out from Twitter, Zabihullah Mujahid's tweet. Now, this is my own assessment. The previous talks, the second round of talks when we were sitting there, there was this talk about infiltrations and stuff. So the army spokesperson the other day, he also mentioned that while we were sitting on the negotiating table, we were confronting them and we were showing them real-time evidence of the infiltration from the Afghan side, and that really needed to be addressed right when it was happening. This has exactly happened yesterday as well. For example, the Zabihullah tweet that came and the sort of allegation that they put on Pakistan, that Pakistan is initiating the firing, and then immediately we saw the information ministry sort of refuting those allegations and coming out very categorically clear that that did not happen from Pakistan side. And Pakistan was actually responding, but Pakistan was also respecting that. Now, your question that what expectations we should have or Pakistan is having, we're being optimistic once again, I would say, but that is not absolute as I believe, as I assess, since these kind of situations, when you're already in a negotiating room and on the table, you have to be considerate of the talks at least. So that was not very evident as till yesterday or yesterday, but as we speak, we're going to look at whatever happens again and how considerably better the situation can be, or maybe a little more seriousness from the Afghan side and the engagement that they're showing should be able to solidify into something really positive.
Thank you so much, Mariam. I want to get back to Anas over here, and then we will be wrapping up the segment. Anas, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Anas, I want you to please let us know what you think is the underlying reason for Afghan government not acting against TTP. It's kind of allowing them to act this way and kind of sponsoring their acts. Is this some kind of fear? Is this some kind of political alignment that is not very explicit for everyone to see? What do you think are the underlying reasons?
Well, Rashida, as someone who's been frequenting Afghanistan uh, way before the Taliban took power, and as someone who's seen the takeover very, very closely, including the day of I was in Kabul when when Taliban had taken over. I think there is one structural problem or ideological problem, and that is something that has been identified in the United Nations Security Council's monitoring team's report that was released in this February, and that is the ideological alignment of these terrorist groups that somehow overlap or intertwine with the Taliban ideologue. And the Taliban are fearful that if they try to crack down on these groups, including the TTP, including the Baloch terrorist organizations or ETIM or the Jaish al-Adl and so on, there is an inherent fear that they say that they might just go on to join the highest bidder, as the term freelance jihadi is pretty much there, and they might end up switching allegiances to the ISK, which of course is a sworn enemy of the Afghan Taliban regime and the Afghan Taliban regime's incumbent form of rule. So, largely speaking, to the weapons that Aisha was referring to a short while back, I think the weapons just did not fall in the hands of TTP. I'll refer you back and I'll take you back slightly in time, less than a month ago, or in fact, a month ago, on the 6th of October, when the Moscow format meeting was taking place. On the sidelines of that, the special representatives from Pakistan, China, Iran, and Russia, these were special representatives of these four countries, particularly on the matter of Afghanistan. They met, and the joint statement that was released that called on the Afghan Taliban to act against organizations that were named, such as the Al Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, the ETI, Al Mahajirun. I mean, I can go on, and the list goes on, and the names would just be there. So it's not just about having these names there. These are existing terrorist infrastructures which the Taliban need to act on. for which they seem to be oblivious. It's the lack of acknowledgement. It's they being not just turning a blind eye, but they being oblivious to it. The reason this further goes on to complicate the situation, the reason we're seeing talks like these in Istanbul, in Doha, they continue, and negotiators and mediators are trying to ensure that there is some headway and that the talks end up being fruitful, with the region not seeing another conflict, with the two countries, those neighborly countries, seemingly living there or having the relationship as at a more stable or a steady path. Shiza?
Right. Thank you so much, Anas. And I would also like to thank Maria Melahi, Aisha Mir, again, Anas Malik for joining us. This has been a very insightful session, to say the least. Of course, all eyes are at the moment on the talks going on in Istanbul between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban, because the thing is, it's not only limited, the outcomes of this talk are not only limited to Pakistan and Afghanistan. This is a regional matter, and regional instability is on its peak at the moment in South Asia because of this ongoing issue. We will be updating you about whatever the outcome of the talks is going to be. But one thing is clear: at the moment, we are dealing with a major mistrust with the Afghan Taliban. And of course, we really want to be on the peaceful side of this. Thank you so much for joining us, and subscribe to Pakistan TV Digital if you want further updates on the matter.